The Prime Minister's speech to the U.S. Congress on Wednesday, July 24th, was painful for me to listen to. The speech was carefully crafted to superficially sound like he was advocating for Israel, so that his base in Israel, which is primarily right-wing, would be proud of him and keep him in power. However, if you listen carefully between the lines, he was doing the exact opposite. He made several arguments to support the fictitious claim that the land of Israel actually does not belong to the Jews, and that the so-called Palestinians are more deserving of the land than the Jews. Moreover, he implied that Palestinian lives are more precious than the lives of the holy IDF soldiers, who put their lives on the line to protect our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land every single day. If you have patience to listen for the next 10 minutes, and you could set your speed to 1.5, you'll begin to appreciate what really makes this seasoned politician tick. At the outset, I need to make something extremely clear. This video is not a personal attack on the Prime Minister. I really have no idea what's going on in his head, and that is not the subject of this video, and it is no concern to me. He fought with distinction in the Israeli army and put his life on the line, something which I did not do. So far be it from me to criticize him. However, Bibi is not in control of his actions. Prime Minister Netanyahu, like the 13 previous prime ministers of the secular state of Israel who preceded him, is under the metaphysical control of Satan, the guardian angel of the Roman Edomite Western Empire, whose goal is to ensure that the Jews who return to the land of Israel remain weak, vulnerable, and completely dependent for their survival on their American overlords. Netanyahu was forced by Satan to ensure that Hamas should be given the opportunity over the past 15 years to build a massive underground military infrastructure with many hundreds of entry points under every hospital, mosque, and UN school, as well as under every other building in Gaza. With the help of Bibi, they literally transformed the entire Gaza Strip into a massive military base. Bibi personally ensured the safe passage of billions of dollars pouring into Gaza from Qatar and many other sources, so that they will have enough money to control every single aspect of life in Gaza. There is nobody who works in Gaza, whether in hospitals, schools, mosques, or in any other human endeavor that is not on Hamas's payroll. Bibi made sure that scores of state-of-the-art massive tunnels wide enough and strong enough for trucks to pass through should be constructed between Egypt and Gaza so that these monsters can bring in weapons of all kinds, including thousands and thousands of missiles, plus materials to build their own weapons factories. And that is why, in the end, Bibi will be forced to accept a crazy lopsided deal in which Israel releases huge numbers of dangerous terrorists and gives up control of Gaza, including the border with Egypt, so that the Egyptians, together with the Iranians, the Qataris, and the Turks, together with their allies, China and Russia, and the West, including the US, can rebuild the military capabilities of Hamas, or whichever other Jew-hating entity controls Gaza after Israel is forced to surrender to Hamas. And after all those suicidal concessions, Israel will probably not even secure the release of most of the hostages while they are still alive. They have done this consistently in all the 13 confrontations with our enemies over the past 75 years. Bibi was also forced by satanic forces to ensure that the border between Gaza and Israel, dotted with dozens of Jewish towns and kibbutzim, a stone's throw away, was protected only by a silly fence that can be cut open with a pair of scissors, and whose sensors can be deactivated with cheap drones you can buy on Amazon. Anyone who believes that the extensive infrastructure built by Hamas was a surprise to the Israelis is not very astute. One thing Israel does have is a very sophisticated intelligence apparatus. They monitor every phone call and text message in Gaza, and they have drones flying over Gaza all the time. The naked and obvious lie promoted by the Israeli government, namely that the 500 miles of tunnels was a surprise to them, is about as credible as UNRWA's claim that they are a peace-loving humanitarian organization. It is impossible for Hamas to dig a single hole in Gaza without the Israelis knowing about it. The millions of tons of earth that had to be extracted and the ginormous amount of concrete and steel that had to be imported for the construction of 500 miles of tunnels was beyond impossible to hide from the eyes of Israeli intelligence. Bibi knew all about this, and he did nothing. Satan did not allow him to say a word. The narrative that the government tries to peddle, namely, that Bibi, together with his comrades in the upper echelons of the Israeli military and intelligence communities, actually had a sophisticated point of view that happened to have been proven wrong. This narrative is a complete smokescreen. It goes like this. Hamas would spend billions of dollars and millions of man-hours to dig tunnels and to train tens of thousands of soldiers for years and years with absolutely no intention of ever using all these resources to attack Israel, because they had modified their extreme opposition against the existence of the State of Israel and were more focused on building a viable and successful Gaza state with money that they didn't have because they spent it all on their military infrastructure. This asinine narrative is comical. Bibi also was forced to sit by and watch as Hezbollah grew into a massive army armed to the teeth by the lunatics of Iran with hundreds of thousands of missiles that pose an existential threat to the State of Israel. And Bibi did nothing to stop them. Bibi couldn't stop them because we're still in exile. The fourth beast in Daniel chapter 7 has still not been completely vanquished. This does not occur until the coming of Mashiach. We often mention the prophecy of our matriarch Rebecca in Genesis 25, where she was told that the children fighting in her womb will be at war with each other until the coming of Mashiach. Esav will dominate Jacob until the redemption, and afterwards it will be the reverse. The words V'rav ya'avoid so'ir in Hebrew can mean that the older will subjugate the younger, or that the older will be subservient to the younger. Our sages teach us that both of these meanings are correct. During the entire period of our exile, the younger one, Jacob, will be subjugated by the elder one, Esav, but afterwards, the elder will serve the younger. We are still in exile, and therefore the Jews cannot have a government with a backbone to stand up to our Roman overlords. It is simply impossible. I believe anyone who ends up in the position of Prime Minister of the secular state of Israel will be turned into an avatar for the satanic forces of the Roman Empire. Even if Rabbi Meir Kahane, may God avenge his blood, would have been the Prime Minister, or even if Yibodel ben Chaim Lechaim Itamar ben Gvir would become the Prime Minister, I don't think they would be able to withstand the forces of Esav, which would invade their minds and seize control of their actions. And that is why, in his address to the U.S. Congress this past Wednesday, July 24th, Bibi made sure to make it very clear that he represents the Palestinian people and not the Jews of Israel, because he never represented the Jews. No leader of the secular state of Israel can truly represent the Jews because they are dominated by the forces of Esav. This is not some weird conspiracy theory. It is quite obvious to anybody who wishes to see. Again, I must reiterate, so that nobody twists my words out of context. I am not referring to what goes on in Bibi's head. I am not accusing him of consciously being a malicious traitor. I am simply stating the obvious, that the only way to understand him, as well as the 13 prime ministers who preceded him, in order to understand their consistently treacherous behavior throughout all these years, is by viewing their actions through the metaphysical lens of our holy sages, who have revealed to us that although the successive government leaders of the secular state of Israel are genetically Jewish, their minds and hearts are completely controlled by the dark forces of Rome. In future videos, I will go through some of the sources with you, but for now, I just want to make some comments about Bibi's speech to Congress this past Wednesday. It was no accident that this speech was presented at the beginning of the 3-week period of mourning that Jews have been observing since the Holy Temple was destroyed. The 3 weeks begin on the 17th day of the Jewish month of Tammuz, this year corresponding to July 23rd, when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, laid siege to the holy city of Jerusalem 425 years before the Common Era. The 3-week period ends on the 9th day of the Jewish month of Av, this year corresponding to August 13th, when the Babylonians engulfed the first holy temple in flames 2 years later. And then again in the year 70, on this very same day in the Jewish month of Av, Titus, with his Roman legions, burnt down the second Holy Temple. It is obviously not by chance that at the beginning of this annual 3-week period of our mourning over the destruction of the first 2 holy temples and the holy city of Jerusalem, which triggered the onset of our exile, that at this very time, the Prime Minister of the current state of Israel announced to the whole world that we are still in exile and that we are still being subjugated by the Roman Empire, to the extent that the Prime Minister of the Jewish state is forced to act as a mouthpiece and an advocate for those who seek our destruction. Bibi was speaking to representatives of a country which is largely Christian and who believe in the Jewish Bible. The Republicans who invited him was certainly mostly religious and God-fearing. Bibi wanted to address the claim leveled against us by the Muslims and their cheerleaders in the rest of the world, and that is that the land of Israel does not really belong to the Jews, but rather to the Muslims, and that we are colonizers who seized it from them illegally. If Bibi had 1 ounce of control over his vocal cords, he would have easily refuted that claim, the same way every 5-year-old Jewish boy who went to Cheder and every good Christian would refute it, namely by referencing the Hebrew Bible, where it is stated black on white dozens of times that the land of Israel was given to the Jewish people by God as their eternal inheritance, and that even if they are temporarily driven from the land because of their sins, God will eventually bring them back because the Jews are intrinsically and eternally bound to the Holy Land. This is not only mentioned continuously throughout the 24 books of Tanakh. It is clearly the underlying theme that runs through the entire Bible from cover to cover. However, being that Bibi is fully controlled by the forces of Edom, he meekly stated that the Jewish rights to Israel is because, and I quote, "The land of Israel is where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob prayed, where Isaiah and Jeremiah preached, and where David and Solomon ruled." Abraham walked in the land almost 4,000 years ago, and Isaiah prophesied in the land almost 2,600 years ago. Now this is the most nonsensical and lame defense of our right to the land of Israel. Would any normal person respect the claim of somebody who knocks on his door and tells him to leave his home immediately because he has a document to prove that 4,000 years ago one of his ancestors walked on the very spot that the home was built on? Or that 2,600 years ago an ancestor who was a prophet had visions under a tree in that very same property? How much more so if this person currently living in that home has a document proving that his family bought the home 1,000 years ago? Do you really think he would willingly walk away from his family estate because some dude knocks on his door claiming that he had an ancestor walking around there 4,000 years ago? Moreover, does Bibi not know that the Muslims claim that Abraham and Isaiah were Muslims, and that the Palestinians are descendants of the ancient Canaanites, and that they were in the land before the Jews came? Now secondly, and this claim is actually true, the Islamic Ottoman Empire controlled the land from the 7th century until the First World War. So who really could care less who was walking around 4,000 years ago? Why did this genius who was educated in MIT deliberately ignore the most powerful, undeniable, irrefutable, indisputable, uncontestable, and incontrovertible claim that the Jews have to the land? The one that would make a real impression on the U.S. Congress and the American people, namely that God Almighty, creator and sustainer of heaven and earth, expressed his promise countless times in the most respected book in all of history, the Hebrew Bible, that the land belongs to the Jews exclusively and for all eternity. The Satan forced Bibi to say that the despicable anti-Semitic residents of Gaza are more precious than the heroic soldiers of the IDF. Bibi brought along with him several heroes of the IDF, among them a courageous Jewish Ethiopian soldier and a Bedouin soldier, and a third hero, Lieutenant Yonatan Ben Hamo, who lost a foot in the current war and then went back to fight for us, and lastly a fourth incredible hero, Lieutenant Asa Sofer, who lost an arm and the vision of one of his eyes in this war, and Asa will soon return to active duty as the commander of a tank company. Bibi rightly saluted these amazing soldiers for their enormous bravery. These individuals are true heroes, together with the hundreds of thousands of their comrades in the IDF. But at the same time that Bibi praised these righteous heroes and their comrades, Satan inspired him to muster the audacity to imply that the lives of these incredible people are less valuable than those of our enemies. Because he went on to proudly boast how the Israeli government under his leadership insists that our brothers and sisters in the IDF meticulously follow the rules of war pontificated to us by all the nations of the world, who incidentally ignore these very rules when they're waging a war against their enemies. And then he went on to brag that Israel goes above and beyond those ridiculous restrictions in order to protect the civilians in Gaza, who hate our guts and celebrate our death and suffering. Bibi knows full well that putting all these shackles on the IDF causes an enormous number of IDF casualties. But Satan forced him not only to give the orders that puts the lives of our dear brothers and sisters in great peril, but to boast about it to the entire world. Then Satan compelled him to profusely heap praise and appreciation for the malevolent Joe Biden. So he talks about his close relationship with him for 40 years, and that Biden was and is a great friend of Israel and an Irish-American Zionist, and that he came all the way to Israel at the beginning of the war to show solidarity with the Jewish state. Bibi, knowingly and unabashedly, was lying through his teeth. Biden did not come to strengthen the Jewish state. He came to warn them that they dare not harm the Jew-hating citizens of Gaza who participated in the October 7th atrocities and celebrated that murderous, sadistic rampage with singing and dancing. These subhuman so-called innocent civilians have been the concern of Biden every single day of this war. Joe forgets and confuses everything under the sun. But he never forgot to mention every single time he spoke about the war, about how Israel must do everything in their power to ensure that none of our sworn enemies in civilian clothing gets hurt. And that enormous amounts of aid must get into Gaza daily so that Hamas could seize it, to feed their soldiers and to finance their war against us. And this Irish-American Zionist also did not forget to mention many times how he does not trust Israel to act humanly towards its friends in Gaza. So therefore he is withholding weapons that the bloodthirsty Jews might use without regard for civilian casualties. After Biden personally schlepped all the way to Israel to deliver his warning to his good friend of 40 years, he continuously sent his Jew-hating Secretary of State to come every few weeks to warn Israel to make sure not to harm the so-called civilians of Gaza, even at the expense of the lives of our courageous soldiers. President Donald Trump, who has an incredible instinctive sixth sense to see through all the muck blinding most politicians, characterized Joe Biden during the previous debate with one single word. He said Joe Biden is a Palestinian. That's all he needed to say, and that says it all. Worst of all, Bibi indicated that the land of Israel does not belong to the Jews, but rather to our enemies, and therefore he will ensure that Gaza remains in the possession of those who despise us and want to kill us. Under no circumstances would the Jews dare reoccupy Gaza, he said, because it belongs to the Palestinians, he indicated, even though it is clearly within the biblical boundaries of the Holy Land of Eretz Yisrael. Of course, he repeated the ridiculous notion that Israel is somehow going to ensure that the Gazans are de-radicalized and transformed into peaceful neighbors. No sane person with the slightest understanding of the dark culture and mentality of the Palestinians and their vicious ideology, which has been fed to them day in and day out for the past 100 years, can even entertain the fantasy that Israel would have the capability of transforming them into peaceful neighbors. Bibi, of course, knows this, but he was forced to encourage the Iranians and all their proxies, including Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Palestinians. He was forced to egg them on to continue their 100-year fight against us. In front of the entire world, he declared that he has every intention of allowing our enemies to take control of Gaza so that they can continue the war against the Jews of Israel. He must surely realize how painful this declaration was to the courageous soldiers who were present in the Hall of Congress, and to the hundreds of thousands of soldiers who are putting their life on the line every single day to rid Israel of the monsters of Hamas. And what about the many hundreds of families who lost loved ones during the Simchat Torah massacre, as well as in the 9 months of war? How do you think they all feel, knowing that Bibi has every intention of surrendering to the Palestinians and allowing them to build up another terrorist state in Gaza as soon as he decides to conclude the war? Satan, who sits in Bibi's brain and controls his every word and action, bombastically boasted in front of the U.S. Congress and the many millions who are watching about the mighty power of the State of Israel and its invincible IDF, which was, he claimed, victorious in all the wars against us, and so he declared, they will continue to protect the State of Israel. This, sadly, is a huge joke. The soldiers of the IDF are indeed extremely capable and courageous and second to none. But in reality, Israel never won a single war. Our enemies were stopped from annihilating us with the help of Almighty God, but consistently after every single war and confrontation, the satanically controlled leaders of the secular State of Israel quickly agreed to a ridiculous ceasefire so that the enemy could rearm and regroup and fight another day. Again, I want to reiterate that this is not a personal attack on Bibi. He is not in control of his actions. He is a puppet controlled by the dark forces of the Roman Edomites and the Ishmaelites. There's only one person who will succeed in being a truly great Prime Minister of Israel, and that is Mashiach Tzidkenu, the King Messiah. You're probably wondering by now how it is possible for me to make such outrageous claims. That Bibi is just a puppet for the guardian angel of Rome, i.e. the Satan, when everybody knows that Bibi is the good guy who is being ferociously attacked by the forces of the left in Israel and throughout the world, who have been trying to take him down for many years. Biden and his administration have been doing everything possible to unseat him. The UN and the ICC have been working overtime to get rid of him. And there are a bunch of other dudes in Israel who are dying to replace Bibi in the Prime Minister's office, who are proudly and unabashedly proxies of the UN and the radical left wing of the Democrats in America. Since all these people and entities who are fighting fiercely to get rid of Bibi are obviously the bad guys and are openly employed by Satan, so how on earth could it be that Bibi is really one of them? The answer is quite simple. Satan does have control over all the bad guys, Jews as well as Gentiles, but most Israelis are proud Jews who believe in God and in our ultimate destiny. There are also many, many righteous Gentiles in the world. And all these Jews and Gentiles cannot be controlled by Satan, but they can be fooled by him. Therefore, Satan has to clothe Bibi in the garments of a right-wing leader who stands up for Israel so that all the good Jews and Gentiles will support him. But the emperor has no clothes. Satan's game is over now because we have just revealed the truth. I have a lot more to say on this topic. Specifically, I want to discuss in future videos how all of the above was predicted by the prophets of the Bible and the holy sages of the Talmud and the Zohar, and how it is all a prelude to the imminent redemption. Please stay tuned. And please share this video and subscribe if you have not already done so. Until next time, may God be with you.